Shalom. Welcome to Jewish Christian Studies as we begin our 46th year of dealing with the Jewish and Christian background of our religions. I'm Father George Belasco, retired priest of the Youngstown Diocese. And this past October 22nd, 2014, I celebrated the 80th anniversary of my baptism. And Father Ray Brown, one of my instructors of happy memory, reminded us priests on many occasions that when we celebrate our baptismal day more importantly than our ordination day, then things will be in proper perspective in the church. So on that 80th anniversary, with the Sisters of Humility to Mary, helped me to host that 80th anniversary, we brought in Rabbi Benjamin Bleck, who wrote with another author, I think Rabbi Joseph is going to tell us that, concerning the secrets of the Sistine Chapel. And at that celebration at the villa, we had Rabbi Joseph Schoenberger from Temple Element to experience that presentation by Rabbi Benjamin. And we also had Saul Oreski from Congregation Ovetsetic, Lover of Righteousness from the south side of Youngstown, and welcoming him into Youngstown. This is his first television appearance and his first year at the synagogue. Welcome to Jewish Christian Studies.
Thank you, Reverend Belasco.
Okay, well, now we go to that presentation that we were at with Rabbi Bleck. What did you take from it? What did you find out from the secrets of the Sistine Chapel, Rabbi Joseph, that intrigued you when he had his presentation?
The whole thing was intriguing. I didn't know what to expect, and I was very taken by something that we have in common, that Jewish mysticism and the centrality of God as a divine force is at our foundations. And it's right there in the Sistine Chapel for everyone to learn from.
Okay, Rabbi Saul, you honored me by being there.
Thank you. I was very taken with the idea, which was a complete revelation to me, that such a well-known sculptor as Michelangelo could have gotten away with such trickery in his art and not suffered for it. That it was a brilliant scheme that he executed of painting what he wanted to paint at great cost, it seems, because he was physically debilitated by that, at least while doing it, and yet producing this phenomenal work of art, still managing to express what he wanted to express while producing this. It was just brilliant.
You know, what intrigued me, because I had the book on my Nook, which is the Barnes & Noble electronic book series. So I don't have all the pictures and all that you would get by buying the hard copy. But when he opened up the dust cover of the original hardback copy, which is the picture of the Sistine Chapel, that kind of blew my mind. Okay, I didn't know about that. That was new for our presentation in the sense of what he presented out at the villa.
Yeah.
But there's an awful lot of things in the sense of codes and all that he was able to hide. We'll speak to that at the end of the Bleck's presentation. And so basically I found that very intriguing. But you were saying something, Rabbi Joseph, about the Aleph and the alphabet that was there in one of the scenes.
Yes, it's amazing how many things Michelangelo hid in all that artwork. He was a genius in being able to do so much, presenting it on many different levels. And one of the things I remember Rabbi Bleck spoke about is the presence of an Aleph and an Ayin in the Sistine Chapel. The Aleph is the first letter of the Hebrew alphabet, and it represents the number one, namely, in the Sistine Chapel, the universality of God, something we have in common. Mm-hmm. And the Ayin is the Hebrew letter that represents the number 70, and in the Bible, the 5 books of Moses, we understand the number 70 to represent, through God's revelation, humanity, the 70 nations of the world that God created. And so together, Rabbi Bleck explained that Michelangelo was giving a message of that all the 70 nations of the world have something in common. We all follow and derive from the unity and the universality of God. And what a fantastic thing to be able to hide in there. And even the hand of God touching directly with a person shows that God has a direct connection with each of us.
I found it intriguing in the sense that in talking about Julius II, Pope Julius II, who commissioned this, that he was going to, have something completely contrary to what Julius wanted. And then he, as Rabbi Blech Zechariah, which we call Zechariah the prophet, had the image of Julius II. And he makes the comment that being that we didn't have Jesus, but you're the vicar of Christ on earth and all that, we put you into the picture. You'll be seeing that in the video here.
And
what about
Rabbi Blech adds to that he started with Adam, God touching Adam's hand rather than Jesus, to emphasize the universality of what we believe in.
What about the guy that walks into the water in the book of the Exodus? Coming out of Egypt.
Nachshon. His father, Aminadav, was depicted in the chapel. The ceiling, and I thought that was brilliant also. Again, another coded message.
I remember he said that his name means a prince that God chose. So it is a hidden message of Jesus. And once they refurbished the Sistine Chapel, they found he was wearing yellow, which was the badge imposed upon Jews.
Okay, with that again, we're going to go to the Orthodox Studios in New York. And this recording comes to us from the year 2011, being that our cameras couldn't be there. And we have permission from Rabbi Blech to show this through the courtesy of YouTube. And so let us go to the presentation by Rabbi Blech.
3 years ago, I had the great honor of completing a book which was published by Harper's and now is in 26 other countries, translated into 16 other languages around the world, because it's a breakthrough book that makes some amazing statements about the Vatican, the Sistine Chapel, Michelangelo, and the frescoes that appear on the ceiling of the Sistine Chapel that are visited by more than 4 million people a year. The book is called The Sistine Secrets, Michelangelo's Forbidden Messages in the Heart of the Vatican. When I did some TV appearances based on the book on 2020, they did a 1-hour show on it. The first question they asked me was, what's a nice Jewish boy, a rabbi, doing in a place like this? Where would I come to be writing a book about the Sistine Chapel and Michelangelo's frescoes? And in order to explain what I did and the remarkable conclusions, I need to give you some background. I've been involved in a project to secure back from the Vatican many Jewish objects that they have in their possession. And for this project, I met with Pope John Paul II several times. One of those meetings, we had a representative group of rabbis, 150 rabbis from around the world, coming to speak to the Pope. And before the meeting, they took a tour of the Sistine Chapel. Giving them the tour was, I think, the only Jewish and Orthodox Jewish docent in the chapel who has dedicated his life to studying Michelangelo and to understanding the Jewish influence on Michelangelo and the secrets within the frescoes. I was busy with bureaucracy. The rabbis took the tour, they came back, they were absolutely spellbound because the person who gave them the tour, a man by the name of Roy Doliner, who, as I said, devoted his life to a study of Michelangelo, showed them things that none of the Christian guides will ever point out, things that have specific relevance to the Jews. Showed them that Michelangelo incorporated Hebrew letters in certain places in the frescoes with messages. Proved to them that Michelangelo hated the Pope at the time because of his exclusionary ideas. Michelangelo was a visionary who believed in Neoplatonic ideology that said there was one world, and Michelangelo hated the concept of the church at the time that persecuted the Jews. Michelangelo made his feelings known in frescoes that have not really been translated or explained in the way in which Michelangelo intended. And there is a great story there. In order for Michelangelo to do what he did, he had to have had a knowledge of Jewish sources, and that too is part of the story. Michelangelo was adopted when he was 13 years old by Lorenzo de Medici, the wealthiest man in the world at the time. Lorenzo hired tutors for his own children, and those tutors taught Michelangelo. One of those tutors was Pico del Mirandola, a man, a Christian, a Catholic, who owned the largest library of Kabbalah in the world at the time, a man who was enamored of Jewish thought and of Jewish commentary on the Torah, on the Bible, and a man who taught all this to Lorenzo de Medici's children as well as to Michelangelo. There are some aspects of the frescoes that don't make sense unless you know that Michelangelo was aware of Talmudic texts and midrashim. For example, on the fresco where he shows the sin of eating the apple. Now, in Western literature and Western art, everybody always called the fruit of the tree of knowledge that they were forbidden to eat by God an apple. Actually, that was a much later interpretation. In fact, there is a Jewish Kabbalistic interpretation that explained it wasn't an apple tree at all, based on a Kabbalistic concept of tikkun hachet, which means whenever people sin, God incorporates into that thing through which they sin something which would allow them to do tshuva, to repent. When they sinned and they knew they were naked, the Torah tells us that they covered themselves with fig leaves. Where'd they get the fig leaves from? And so Kabbalah tells us the tree was a fig tree. What's fascinating is if you look very carefully, the tree that Michelangelo painted, unlike anybody else in the Western world, was a fig tree. And Michelangelo could only have known that from the study of Kabbalah, which he got from Pico del Mirandola. Well, there were so many fascinating things that the rabbis who took the tour learned that they came back and they told me, we've just had the most incredible experience. They shared with me what they had learned, and they told me that I must meet this Roy Doliner. Roy had said to them, when they indicated to him that he must write this up as a book, that he's not a writer, and so they said that Rabbi Blech on the tour is an author of many published works. Make the story short, we got together, and together we created this book. When people ask me, Rabbi Blech, what is the basis of your knowledge of Michelangelo and the frescoes? How are you an art expert? I explain, and it's important for you to know that this was really not my field of study. Roy Doliner came up with all the ideas, but in order to indicate that this jibes with Jewish sources, Kabbalah, Midrash, Talmud, that's my area of expertise, and I did the writing. The end result was something that the Vatican is not too happy with, because we reinterpret something that is in their domain in a way different from what they see in it. When people ask, and this is important for me to state at the outset, what gives you the right? How do you know that what you are saying is correct? Do scholars agree with you? I simply tell them that Enrico Bruscini, who was the official art historian of Rome, the man designated to give the tour of the Sistine Chapel to every American president who has gone to view it, Enrico Bruscini read the manuscript, and it took his breath away, and he said the following, and I quote, "Just as the work of Michelangelo in the Sistine Chapel changed forever the world of art, so will this book change forever the way to view and above all to understand the work of Michelangelo. That's some great applause for the ideas, and therefore it's important for me to have told you at the outset in order for you to appreciate that this is a work of true scholarship and is shaking up the world of art, even as it reinterprets Michelangelo in ways that are extremely significant for Jews and for Judaism. So let's begin by explaining to you that the Sistine Chapel ceiling was painted by Michelangelo at the request, and better put, at the order of Pope Julius II. Pope Julius II said to Michelangelo, I want you to do the ceiling, and I want it in honor of Jesus and the Virgin Mary. Michelangelo refused because he said, I'm not a painter. Michelangelo always signed his work, Michelangelo the sculptor. He had done very little painting, but the Pope said, you're going to do it. And you didn't say no to the Pope. However, Michelangelo had a trick up his sleeve, and this is what is utterly fascinating. Michelangelo was forced to do this. It was a work that would take him 4.5 years. It was a work that drained him physically. He was up on a scaffold that he invented 62 feet up in the air. But he didn't want to do what the Pope told him to do. He did not really want to do this in honor of Jesus and the Virgin Mary. So he said to the Pope, I will finish this task, but on one condition. I don't want to be disturbed and bothered while I'm doing it. Please don't give me advice as I'm continuing the work. You can see it when it's finished. And because of Michelangelo's prestige, the Pope went along with this part, and Michelangelo finished the job, and when it was done, and the unveiling took place, lo and behold, the Pope discovered there was not a single, and there is not a single Christian figure in the work of Michelangelo on the ceiling of the Sistine Chapel. There's no Jesus, there's no Mary. 95% of the figures represented that Michelangelo painted are figures from the Jewish Torah, what they call the Old Testament, which is a term that obviously we do not like, implying that there is a new. But 95% from our Torah and 5% pagan. Nothing from that which Pope Julius II instructed and commanded Michelangelo to do. If you wonder, as people have, how come he didn't get his head handed to him when the work was shown, because it was not what his patron had ordered him to do, the first way to answer that is by having a look at what greeted the Pope as he entered the Sistine Chapel. The doorway today is different than it was then in the 1500s, when it was completed in 1512. When the Pope came in, the first thing over the entrance was a fresco clearly identified as Zechariah. The prophet Zechariah, if you take a look at his face, you're not going to be aware of this, but I'm going to tell you that what Michelangelo did as a brilliant move was to paint the face of Julius II as the face of the prophet Zechariah, so that when the Pope would enter and surely would say, what is this? I commissioned you to do Jesus and the Virgin Mary. Michelangelo's response would have been, to the egomaniac that was Julius II, well, I thought that it would be far more representative and far more appropriate to do you, who is the Jesus of our times. But Michelangelo didn't really intend to flatter Zechariah. First, let's explain why he picked Zechariah of all prophets as the first one to greet visitors and to greet the Pope. And then let's discover the secret message that Michelangelo embedded into the fresco. Zechariah is known for one outstanding outstanding view that he promulgated and that he persisted in emphasizing. We read Zechariah as the Haftorah for Hanukkah because he has the vision of the menorah. And that's the appropriate story for and Haftorah for Shabbos Hanukkah. The menorah has branches representing different aspects of wisdom, and all the branches bend towards the center. And that vision is a vision not of exclusion, which was the message of the church at the time. Nobody knows the truth except for them, and everybody else is damned to go to hell. But rather, Neoplatonic thought of inclusion. There are many different ways to come to the Lord. All different branches lead to the center. Zechariah is the one whose words we quote at the conclusion of every single service. Whenever we pray, we finish with the line at the end of Aleinu, V'ne'emar, V'hoyo Hashem lamelech al kol ha'aretz b'yom hu yeh Hashem echad u'shmo echad. In that day, the ultimate day, the Lord will be one and his name will be one. One God for the whole world, not some of the world cast off forever into Dante's Inferno, into the hell for non-believers. Eventually, all the world will be joined together as children of the one God. That was a daring message. One other thing. Zechariah is the prophet who predicted that they will come from the north because of the sins of the priesthood of the Jewish people, and they will destroy Jerusalem. And perhaps in a deeper sense he was saying, the sins of the priesthood, a priesthood such as the one that was illustrated by Pope Julius II, who had syphilis, who had mistresses, who loved gold, who was someone who typified a non-spiritual lifestyle. Michelangelo was saying, watch out, they will come and destroy this temple because of the impoverished state of spiritual leadership. The most powerful thing of all, though, is to take a look at the hidden message in this fresco. Right in back of Pope Julius, there are two cartoonish figures. Michelangelo did that a lot. Michelangelo used them to make statements, little angelic figures, right behind the prophet Zechariah, who, as I've already told you, based on his visage, is really Pope Julius II. And one has his hand over the shoulder of the other, and this can't be seen 60.5 feet away on the floor, all the way up to the top. But Michelangelo must have had quite a chuckle when he did this. Today, with telescopic lenses, we can see this clearly, and this can be blown up, was blown up, and we can see what the angel is doing when he is putting his hand around his friend. His fingers are in a very fascinating position. Now, I don't know if you're aware of this. In America, when you want to insult someone, we say you give them the finger, and we utilize the middle finger. In Europe, to this very day, what they do is to take the thumb and put it between the two fingers like this, and that's called giving the fig. There's a Yiddish expression, ich feig auf dir, which is the same thing. I give you the fig. Well, lo and behold, the Pope would be walking in. Over his head was Zechariah. Zechariah, the face of Julius, and one angel over the other. And the back of the face of Pope Julius is giving him the fig. There couldn't be a stronger condemnation of the Pope in a very fascinating manner than that. Michelangelo made another remarkable statement, which appears in his fresco that he identifies as Aminadav. Peculiar that, after all, there are only a limited number of individuals that he has chosen to depict, that he would choose Aminadav, who is hardly well known, even by Jews. We know him primarily because of his son, Nachshon ben Aminadab. Nachshon is famous because when the Jews were at the sea, the Egyptians were pursuing them. They didn't know what to do. God said to Moses, tell them just to walk. They start walking until their neck. The first one to walk in, who proved that he had faith, was Nachshon. And when the waters went up to his neck, that's when the waters split. Only when we went as far as we could go did God perform the miracle of splitting of the sea. This is Nachshon. Nachshon ben Aminadav. Remarkable that he should be chosen, but far more remarkable is what you see when you look at this fresco. Look at Aminadav's left arm. As you're looking at him, it's to your right. The paint on the Sistine Chapel ceiling had begun to lose its luster. It was refinished, and they brought out the vivid colors once again in 2000, 2001, and it can be seen clearly now. You will see that on the left arm of Aminadav, there is a yellow circle. That yellow circle was something that the church commanded that Jews wear based on a ruling in 1104, the Lateran Council, that in order to indicate their lower status, Jews had to wear something that defined them as inferiors. Of course, we are all familiar with the fact that in Nazi Germany, the Jews had to wear a yellow star. In Muslim countries, prostitutes had to wear a yellow band, yellow being the symbol of urine, and again, showing their low status. Jews had to wear a yellow armband based on a decree of the church. Watch this brilliance of Michelangelo. Aminadav was chosen because Aminadav in Hebrew means prince of my people and is the term that is used in the church to describe Jesus. Jesus is Aminadav. And Michelangelo, who was extremely upset by the anti-Semitism of the church of his time, the way in which the Jews were put down, and by the fact that they were forced to wear these armbands that made them inferior, said, you are doing this to Jews. Do you know that Jesus was a Jew, and if Jesus were alive today, Jesus, would have to wear a yellow armband? Michelangelo put the yellow on the person who was a stand-in for, as Prince of my people, for Jesus himself. Because very often Michelangelo wanted to express how upset he was at the fact that the church, you remember at that time, we're talking about the early 1500s, and 1492 was when the Jews were kicked out of Spain, when the worst horrors of the church came into play. Michelangelo made the statement in another way, if you will take a look at the very famous portrait of the Last Judgment. Now, I just make clear that the Last Judgment is on the wall and not on the ceiling. It was painted 20 years later when they forced Michelangelo to come back and to do more, but this time they were watching him carefully. And he painted that on the wall. The first one you can see, he made it look like, I'm sure you can all see the connection, this and that looks just like the two luchot. When you're coming close, the Last Judgment is a depiction of Jesus and a circle, the circle of the righteous, those who surround him, near him forever and ever. That's to say, those who have earned the right to the special place in heaven because of leading a righteous life. Now, it's very, very small. And again, you have to know to look for it. In the fresco, what we did was, if you take a look at the next illustration, we circled it so that you can see clearly, and we enlarged it. Over Jesus, To the right and on top, there are two figures. One of them is wearing a blue hat. The blue hat has 2 points. That was called the Jew hat, to indicate that Jews have horns. And the man is lifting up one finger, one God. Next to him is a man with a yellow hat, yellow the urine. Both of those are clearly Jews, and they are in heaven near Jesus. Dante had said, "Hell, abandon hope, or ye enter here." The church had said, and to this day many in the church still say, if you don't believe in Jesus, there is no salvation. Anyone who doesn't believe in Jesus goes to hell. The only way to be redeemed, to be saved, is through belief in Jesus. Michelangelo daringly put 2 Jews in the circle of the righteous. That was remarkable. Going to the most famous of the frescoes, the one that is considered probably, if not the, certainly next to the most famous work of art in Western civilization. There's the Last Supper, there is Mona Lisa, there is the creation of Adam. This fresco has Kabbalistic ideas, which we develop at length. But briefly, the first thing that should be noted about it is that on the right, there is God stretching out his finger to create Adam. And God is in this, what shall we call it? We don't know what it is. It's some kind of an object with little things dangling down from it. Now, it was not Roy Doliner and I who made this first discovery. This was in 1971 that a Jewish doctor went into the Sistine Chapel, looked at the fresco, and made a discovery that to this day is in almost all art books considered verified and correct. He said that if you block out the colors and you take a look, you will see Anatomy 101 that the thing that God and the little figures with him are in is a cross-section of the brain. Michelangelo, we do know this for a fact, did something that the church forbade. You weren't allowed to do dissections of the dead. Michelangelo paid off some people, got some bodies in order to learn the structure of the human body of anatomy better, and so that he could sculpt more proficiently. He knew what the brain looked like. And he did this cross-section of the brain, and you see the little, what looks like scarves is actually, this is the cerebellum, and this is the brain that God is in order to create Adam, because the statement that Michelangelo was trying to make is something that we Jews say whenever we think about the beauty of the body, even after such a seemingly physical thing as going to the bathroom, we say, Asher Yotzar et ha'adam b'chachma, who created et ha'adam, not man, et ha'adam, Kabbalah says, the Adam, Adam 1, with, in Sfirot, in Kabbalistic thought, with chachma, with wisdom. What is this in contemporary terms? The whole dispute and discussion about whether man was created with intelligent design. Michelangelo was saying it had to be intelligent design. And God is touching Adam and giving him life through his left hand, the left closer to the heart, just like the tefillin, and through the left hand, fascinatingly enough, Michelangelo was left-handed. If we go to the next fresco, we see Jeremiah. Jeremiah is sitting above where the Pope would sit. It is remarkable, if you take a look at him, that he's sitting there with boots. There is nobody else who has shoes on. shoes make a dramatic statement, and when they're over the head of the Pope, that statement is clear, especially since there was a painting previously there on the wall that had the scene of Moses at the burning bush, where you will all remember that God said to Moses, take off your shoes, for the place where you are standing is holy ground. And holy ground and shoes don't go together. And here is Jeremiah with boots on. What a statement. The boots are on because the holiness of this place has been affected. And for that reason, Jeremiah is using this pose. And it is a pose of great sadness. And the sadness is the message of Jeremiah. And what was Jeremiah's message in the Torah? Jeremiah predicted the destruction. Jeremiah was the prophet of doom. Jeremiah was the prophet of exile. Take a look at the two figures on either side of him, and you will see something remarkable. The one on the right, that is to say, as you view it, is a young woman dressed, ready to travel. Scarf over, head covered. Similarly, the one on the left, the blonde, very tragic, looking down, very sad, because they are going to be going into exile. The key colors, the blonde, yes, yellow, and then the red of the one going to travel. Red and yellow to this day. Go to Rome, the taxi cabs are yellow and red, because that is the color scheme of the city of Rome. Rome, Jeremiah, pensive, sad, because Michelangelo was saying, boots on, this place is losing its holiness. You are losing your raison d'etre, your reason for being, and therefore, watch out, exile will be something that is in store for Rome, and indeed, that is what happened towards the end of that very century. If you take a look at the blonde one more time, the blonde is looking down, and there's a scroll at the bottom. That's what the blonde is looking at. And the scroll seems to be just some squiggles at first glance. But we can blow that up, and so we did, and that's the next illustration that we have. And there are letters there. I've been told by many people who took the tour in the Vatican and in the Sistine Chapel that the Catholic guides, when they're asked what does it say, their answer is nothing. It's just a squiggle indicating it's a scroll. But we can make it out. And please look with me. I put an arrow there so that you can read it with me. A-L-E-F, Aleph. That's the Hebrew letter Aleph, written out in our script. And then there is a Hebrew letter written in Hebrew script. And what is that? Ayin. Aleph Ayin. What does that mean? Aleph is one. And for us and for him, everyone knew the concept of one God. Here was Michelangelo saying one God, but what is Ayin? And with his background and with his understanding of Kabbalah and with the information he got from his teacher Pico, the Ayin we know 70 represented to him what it represents to us, the 70 nations of the world. One God, 70 nations of the world. What an incredible insight. And what a daring insight at a time when the church was totally exclusionary. I must say that today the church, to a great extent, no longer espouses those views, but Michelangelo was certainly 500 years ahead of his time in emphasizing that. It should be noted that the very fact that Michelangelo, when he did the frescoes, did the ceiling, beginning with Adam, was a statement with the same concept behind it. In Christian thought, as a matter of fact, in secular terms, this is 2011. 2011 from what? From the birth of Jesus, because all history for them before Jesus is meaningless. Fascinating that for us, Jews, we count the years from Adam, because we consider universal man, the father of all mankind, the key to history. And we don't say history begins only with Jesus and is only significant in terms of its Christian adherence. Michelangelo, on the frescoes, all the paintings that he painted, the center scene were from Bereshit through Noah, the beginning of the story of creation. What he was doing was saying, we are all brothers, we all come from one man. Again, the Neoplatonic ideal of universality, the universalism of God. Aleph, Ayin. We go to the next fresco because it is a remarkable, outstanding fresco that Michelangelo painted towards the very end. Probably was the last thing he did. Saved it for the last. And saved the most powerful message for the last. It's the most outstanding in a way that you can perhaps even see by looking at the picture of it. Michelangelo had learned to do 3 dimensions in 2. If you see this, actually, you cannot believe that it's painted on a flat surface. This looks like it's coming out at you. Look at the arm, look at the legs. You would swear that it's 3-dimensional. It isn't. Michelangelo wanted it to be outstanding because the message was outstanding. Now here, giving this prominence to the prophet Jonah is absolutely incredible at first glance because Jonah is a minor prophet, both in Jewish tradition as well as in Christian. Altogether 42 sentences. Why make this the one that stands out so? What is there about the message of Jonah that appealed to him so? We as Jews know that Jonah is reserved, the book of Jonah is reserved for a special place on Yom Kippur at the end of the day, at the end as we begin to draw near to the conclusion of this day of fasting and of repentance. We tell the story of Jonah. And what basically is the story of Jonah? A man who didn't want to assume the role that he was given, wanted to escape, fled. And that's, of course, when swallowed by a whale, he had to go back. Eventually, he had to deliver the message. Does that ring a bell for us in terms of Michelangelo? Of course. Michelangelo, just like Jonah, didn't want to do the job he was commissioned to do. As a matter of fact, I hadn't told you yet that 2 times he tried to flee, just as Jonah did, to flee his commission. Michelangelo has to do the job because the Pope insists. Jonah had to do the job because God insisted. What was his job? To preach to the Gentiles, a unique, a very unusual mission for a Jewish prophet, to preach to the Gentiles. Does that ring a bell? Of course it does. What was the mission of Michelangelo? What did he consider his mission? To preach to the Gentiles, to do tshuva. In the story of the book of Jonah, although Jonah didn't want to accept the message and he felt it would be pointless, why go tell them to repent or else Nineveh will be destroyed? Jonah brings this message to the people of Nineveh, and lo and behold, they believe, they accept, they repent, and Nineveh is saved. And I'm sure that Michelangelo hoped and prayed that the same thing would be true in this instance, and maybe he would get his ideas across, and maybe he would temper the anti-Semitism and the hatred of the church of his time and give it a more universal kind of flavor. You see that here too there are 2 figures, 2 little angelic figures. Michelangelo wanted the church to go back to its roots, and the roots of the church were the Chumash, the 5 books of Moses. And that's why he chose the subjects that he did for the ceiling, the center of the ceiling. Take a look at what the top angel is doing, putting up his hand. What do you see clearly? 5 fingers. And if I say to you, who knows 5? Anyone with slightest of intelligence and anyone who can remember the Haggadah and sitting at the Seder will be able to respond, I know 5. 5 are the books of Moses. Indeed, that's what he was saying. And in a more remarkable way, you see that the angel right below him, right below the hand with the 5 up, is looking down at the legs of Jonah. The legs, which, and Michelangelo does this numerous times, and we have it in the book, uses the way in which people disport themselves, the positions that they take, to make it look like Hebrew letters. In this case, Jonah and the position of his legs creates a Hebrew letter. You will see that there is a diaper, or whatever you want to call it, over the genitalia of Jonah. Nowhere else did Michelangelo do that. He wasn't hesitant about portraying genitalia. As a matter of fact, later on, the church got upset by that, and they hired somebody to cover up the ceiling and to undo all these blatant sexual symbols. But Michelangelo didn't hesitate, except for here, because in doing this, the legs of Jonah form a Hebrew letter. Watch. The top angel, 5. The bottom angel says, and take a look. What kind of 5? See the legs going this way and that. That is the Hebrew letter Hey. And there it is. The 5 and the 5. 5 is a number and 5 is a Hebrew letter. And take a look at Jonah's fingers on the left-hand side. And Jonah makes, with his hands, a form of a Hebrew letter. And that Hebrew letter is the Beis, the Bet. And that Beis is the opening letter of the Hebrew Torah, Bereshit bara Elokim. Jonah looks up to the heavens. The Pope is below him. Let's say this more clearly. Jonah looks away from the Pope towards the heavens one more time, indicating the disdain that Michelangelo had for that present Pope. The Pope who Michelangelo knew was not living up to the spiritual demands of his high position. I have the last, it's not a fresco, but a remarkable historic coincidence. There's no such thing as coincidence, I believe. A remarkable final word from God himself. Michelangelo died. We indicate in the book that the church began to get wise to the way in which Michelangelo sent messages and espoused ideas that were not in harmony with the traditional church thinking of the time. When Michelangelo died, the church buried him in Rome in a very nondescript place, off the beaten path, because they didn't want to give him the honor that was due to him. It was very disrespectful. The people in Florence, where Michelangelo came from, were aware of this, and they were very upset. And so they did something remarkable. They made an appeal. This is history. It sounds like a funny story. Perfect for a movie. They made an appeal, and they hired the 2 best thieves of the time to go to Rome and steal Michelangelo's body and bring it back to Florence so that they might bury him with the proper honor and respect. They went and they did their job well. It's a great story. The movie possibilities are fantastic. As a matter of fact, we are in the midst of negotiations with a major corporation to see whether this will be turned into a movie. Anyhow, they bring the body back. Body's hidden in straw, comes to Florence, and they bury Michelangelo as he should be buried in the church of Santa Croce, where he is buried to this day. But in 1845, something very fascinating happened. The church wanted to fix itself up a little bit and to build a nicer facade and beautify itself. They needed an architect. The best architect was a Jewish architect. And they went to him, Matas, and they said, we want you to do this work. Michelangelo's buried here. It's a great job. And it's a beautiful church. Make it more beautiful. Matas said, I'll be happy to do it, but one condition. I want my name attached to my work. I do this. I want the honor of being acknowledged as the architect. And they said, no way will a Jew ever have his name on a church. So they argued back and forth. Matas was not really in a position to have the upper hand, so they compromised. And the compromise was that they won't put his name, but at the top of the church, indicating that a Jew did this, there would be a Magen David. And lo and behold, there you can see on the facade, and it's to this very day, there is a Magen David. And underneath that Magen David, a Kabbalistic symbol of the unity of the whole world, of God the Creator being the one who loves all people, and of all people having the opportunity to come to him, and of no one people being cast out. Lo and behold, where Michelangelo is buried, on top of that church, there is a Magen David. I think that's God's way of saying that Michelangelo came to understand a great many of the teachings of Kabbalah, and had, if not a great Jewish heart, at least a great heart for Jews. And therefore, there would be that acknowledgement in the church on which he is buried. There is so much more, but this is merely a taste of what we have discovered. Does the church agree with this? No. Do great scholars about Michelangelo agree? Many of them do. This is still a battle to be won for us to gain full acceptance, but more and more, as I've said, this book that reveals all these secrets is now in 26 countries, translated into 16 other languages. You can find it in Portuguese, Spanish, Chinese, Italian. I have the Japanese edition. Hopefully the news will get out that Michelangelo was an Ohev Yisrael, loved the Jewish people, and hated the hypocrisy and the anti-Semitism of the church of his time. May that message go forth today until it is understood, grasped, and embraced by all peoples and all mankind. Thank you.
We want to thank Rabbi Bleck for giving us permission to use that footage that you have just viewed. And as we now coming away from that presentation, I find it intriguing about the Jonah story, because you use it on Yom Kippur, and there's that story of the fish that's there. And any comment on that? Because how did that fit into the presentation? Because how is it used at Yom Kippur? The story of Jonah. He had to go to Nineveh. And the idea of foreign people, in a sense.
I think we identify with that because he had to go to people who are the worst of the worst in the world and ask them to repent.
Yeah, they destroyed the 10 tribes of the north, right. And that was the enemy personified in the sense of,
And Rabbi Blech talks about it as Jonah was a prophet from God and the Jewish people to the rest of the world.
And he was criticizing, Michelangelo was criticizing Pope Julius. He didn't have a very, how would you say, good bio in the sense of his background. He did have concubines, and basically he died of syphilis or something like that. So, and we can't cover that up. There is history of the church in the sense when the money people started to take power in the church and all that. They wanted their relatives in order to become the Bishop of Rome and all that. So let's face it, we have to face that. But it seems Michelangelo is very critical of what's going on in the church, and he's making it known by including the art pieces.
Perhaps by emphasizing the, quote, Old Testament characters, that he might have wanted to return the church to a more basic, a more original view of the world. So to do that, to go back to the Old Testament, seemed to be...
Yeah, Michelangelo seemed to have a background wherever he was trained, in Florence.
Yeah.
Was it a Medici family in the sense that hired a tutor that had a Kabbalah library? Or was
yes, Rabbi Blech explained that he was kind of adopted by the Medici family and their tutor, and tutored by the same tutor that tutored their children. And he was steeped with one of the largest libraries of mysticism, which included a lot of Jewish Kabbalistic material. And so that was part of all their education. And just for a historical note, I thought it's amazing background that the Sistine Chapel itself, the original architect, even before Michelangelo, designed the Sistine Chapel to be from using the material from the Kabbalists and from the Hebrew Bible, the Old Testament, with all the dimensions of the Holy of Holies.
The Solomon's Temple.
And the floor itself, if you look at pictures of the floor itself, the tiles, they represent the 10 concentric circles of reality, the Sephirot, that are the Kabbalistic reality, and those are used to choreograph Mass. So Michelangelo the foundations were already laid for Michelangelo to present what he did, because he seemed to understand it so well, and because of his genius, he was able to do something perhaps no other human being could have done, to maybe make a bridge between the reality of the architect that the original Sistine Chapel was designed with versus the reality he saw in his day, which was getting away from that in the church.
Before us, we have the film of the story of Michelangelo, Agni and the Ecstasy. And the star of the show is really Moses, okay? It's Charlton Heston, and he plays Michelangelo in that film. And what I find very interesting, if you go into the storyline of the fighting going in there, where he has to deal with Pope, what's his name? Julius II, about what pictures are going to go on the ceiling. And there's a little scene, he goes into a bar and he criticizes the guy that's serving his wine, that the wine is terrible. And the guy said, my wine couldn't be terrible. Then he tasted it, found it was sour. Then he kind of knocks down the keg. Then Michelangelo tears up the pictures that he had for the Sistine Chapel, and he starts again. And then let's get all the images coming from the Hebrew Scriptures. But he did some other work, and those models are before us. This is the real true model. I don't know how they make it, but it looks like it. You got Moses, which is at the Church of St. Peter in Chains. And that was to be commissioned for Julius II's tomb. The other one is the Pietà. Okay, now, either of you rabbis, why the horns on the idea of Moses?
It's a simple mistranslation that when Moses came down from Mount Sinai, it said that his face shone with beams of light. Well, beams and horns are the same word in Hebrew. So they were, I guess, maybe perhaps it was too difficult.
No, I think what he did, there's an interpretation of that. That statue was to be higher up in St. Peter's. And by the way, Julius was rebuilding the tomb of St. Peter's in what we call the Vatican. Yeah. And that was to be high enough that there would be an opening in the ceiling and the light would come down and shine on those two pieces and give the glow. But now when it came down to ground level, it tended to be sort of like he had horns. I could give you a sidebar on that about Rabbi Marvin. The other one's a Pietà. Now, the other is Mary in the sense, but when they asked Michelangelo, why did you make her so young? So she would have been around maybe 40 or 50 when Jesus died and all that. He said, that's not Mary. That is Sarah. And Sarah never grew older than 21 years of age. And I'm convinced that that is the binding of Isaac story told to us by Michelangelo. And so people can look this up on their own. They can go to Wikipedia. They can go to the website for Rabbi Bleck. And you mentioned he has other books in the sense, Understanding Judaism, The Idiot's Guide to those.
Here, I brought these
and so,
to show.
And we have programs going on in the north side of mysticism coming up for the next session. And we're continuing at the Villa on Jewish Christian Studies. And with that, thank you for listening and shalom.